Hello guys, Divergence and Typicals. Today I want to talk about quitting weed. The first point I would like to make is that cannabis addiction is much harder to quit than most people anticipate. It acts so hard on our endocannabinoid system that the more you use, the harder it is to get off of it. At one point, your endocannabinoids are unable to cope with their everyday tasks because your system is already so used to smoking joints and using other cannabis products. Thus, quitting can be a very miserable process filled with anxiety, with anger, having trouble sleeping, mood swings, and many more. And most people nowadays don't even realize the dangers of cannabis use. The second point I would like to make is that long-term cannabis use induces both depression and anxiety. And when you think about it, it's no wonder they do. People are very often depressed and anxious that they're staying complacent in a situation that they do not want to be. There are definitely healthy levels of worrying and sadness, but when it goes over a certain barrier, it becomes anxiety and depression. And the longer you stay in a comfort zone, in a situation that you dislike, the more anxiety about the future you're going to generate, and depression that you're not willing to change and that you have wasted a lot of time. So keep in mind that cannabis does this to change their workplace, their circle of friends, their family situation, or professional development. So next point I like to make is cannabis versus CBD oil. And from my own experience, I can tell you, you can get addicted to both. I've read many articles in the past and heard a lot of stories of CBD oil being used for autism, for preventing meltdowns, for cutting down the anxiety. And to tell you, for a short while, I was hooked until I became increasingly aware that I was becoming as addicted to CBD as I was to cannabis. My meltdowns were almost certain when I would stop using CBD. And the reason for that is the same. It's simply that your endocannabinoid system cannot cope on its own when you start using either cannabis or CBD. So the fourth key point I would like to discuss is early cannabis use, quitting, and psychosis. The earlier you start using cannabis, the harder it will be to get off of it. I started using at 13. Well, my first joint was when I was 13, and I had probably smoked 5 or 6 times until I got to 14, but then it was almost everyday use until I was 30. The little episodes I had for not using because I was either unable to find or traveling somewhere, I was extremely anxious. I was dealing with so much anger and I had so many meltdowns. And the aggression, oh my god, it's horrible. You become aggressive to everybody around you. And when it was finally time to quit, I tried quitting 3 times seriously. It's such an immense pressure to do it. The first week is almost unbearable. You can't sleep, you're angry at everybody, you're anxious all the time. It's just horrible, it's a hell, especially if you're an everyday user. And not only that, but quitting can sometimes lead to psychosis. Imagine being unable to calm your mind down for a few days and not being able to sleep at all. The dangers then of somebody going into psychosis is much greater than people would think of. So point number 5 I would like to make is about legalization and the cannabis industry. Cannabis is now being legalized in more and more countries in the West, and the industry has been prepared about it for years. And these are usually not small farmers that produce it, how it used to be thought, but they're just large companies that take all the market. And what do? They advertise and advertise and advertise to people. And what used to be thought that cannabis use is going to decrease with legalization, it turned out the opposite because of all this advertisement. And as a comparison, I lived in the Netherlands for 4 years, and there I understood that the Dutch people use much less cannabis compared to tourists. This is because cannabis was legalized there in the 70s and the industry was much different back then. So it did not push people for so much use, and it provided space for small farmers to participate in the market. So from here follows the next point I like to make, which is high levels of THC and psychosis again. The weed nowadays is not the same as people from the hippie era smoked. The percentages of THC have gone from 20 to 25 to even 30 and more, compared to the 60s and the 70s, where they were most probably not more than 10. And there is more and more research coming out in the recent few years about the link between high THC levels and psychosis. And people have to be really careful about it, because it can totally ruin somebody's psyche. And the last point I would like to make is about the ancient spiritual origins of the plant. Cannabis originates from India and is considered one of the sacred plant medicines of the world. It was used during ceremonies and to achieve higher states of consciousness. And nowadays you can already see some cannabis retreats popping up where, led by shamans, cannabis use is strictly used for spiritual purposes. However, on the other hand, in modern day society, cannabis is used as a drug. It has become synonymous with being a couch potato and binge watching movies or playing video games. There is nothing spiritual about that. It is just passing through life without acquiring any new experiences, without trying anything new outside of your comfort zone of watching movies and playing video games and being stoned all day long. So if you're addicted to cannabis, or you have somebody close to you, think about it. Think about how much of that is just coping with life and staying in the comfort zone, because it's not comfort at all staying in a situation that you deeply disdain and want to move on. All the anger, all the anxiety is just pushing you to realize you've got to change. So listen to your heart and think about it. So that's all for today. Thank you guys for staying with me, and may peace be with you all.